On the night of April 14th, 1865, a single pistol shot ended the life of Abraham Lincoln and changed the course of American history. The world was told it was the act of one man, a fanatic. The case was closed, the conspirators were hanged, and the nation moved on. But 3 or 4 hours before that shot was fired in Washington, the news of Lincoln's murder was already circulating in the streets of St. Joseph, Minnesota, a town with no telegraph and no railroad within 80 miles. Someone knew, and that someone was not John Wilkes Booth. This is the story of who did know. It is a story that begins not in 1865, but in 1540, when a wounded Spanish soldier founded a religious order that would become, in the words of Napoleon Bonaparte, the most absolute of despotisms the world has ever seen. It is a story that runs through the secret councils of Vienna, Verona, and Chieri, where the destruction of the American Republic was formally planned and ordered. What follows in this video is drawn entirely from the historical record, from the testimony of senators, secretaries of the Navy, former priests, inventors, generals, and presidents. The conclusion they all reached, independently and across more than 2 centuries, was the same. The Jesuits of the Vatican planned and executed the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. In 1540, Pope Paul III officially recognized a new religious order that would fundamentally alter the course of Western history. Founded by Ignatius of Loyola, a former Spanish soldier, the Society of Jesus, commonly known as the Jesuits, emerged at a moment of profound crisis for the Roman Catholic Church. Martin Luther had nailed his 95 Theses to the door of the Wittenberg Chapel in 1517, and the Protestant Reformation was dismantling centuries of papal authority across Europe. Rome needed a response. In the Jesuit Order, it found one. Loyola founded the order in the 1540s, and its position within the Roman Catholic Church was solidified during the Council of Trent, which ran from 1546 to 1563. The Council of Trent was convened with one great goal in mind: how to stop the Protestant Reformation. The Reformation had begun when Luther, described as the fearless German friar, challenged, among other things, the heinous doctrine of indulgences taught by Rome, the declaration that a man could save himself and loved ones by dropping enough coins into the Catholic Church's coffers. Luther's great teachings, that the Bible alone was the standard for all doctrine and practice, and that a person is justified before God through faith in Jesus Christ alone, sent thrills through the hearts of thousands throughout Europe, and shockwaves through the halls of the Vatican. Thus, the Council of Trent was convened to counter the Reformation, and the Jesuits would be the chief tools of Rome to undo and destroy every trace of Protestantism wherever it was found. The order was described in the following terms by those who studied it most closely.
Throughout Christendom, Protestantism was menaced by formidable foes. The first triumphs of the Reformation past, Rome summoned new forces, hoping to accomplish its destruction. At this time, the Order of the Jesuits was created, the most cruel, unscrupulous, and powerful of all the champions of popery. Cut off from earthly ties and human interests, dead to the claims of natural affection, reason and conscience wholly silenced, they knew no rule, no tie, but that of their order, and no duty but to extend its power.
The organization that emerged from Loyola's vision was, from the beginning, something fundamentally different from any religious order that had preceded it. As one historical account described,
"They are Jesuits. This society of men, after exerting their tyranny for upwards of 200 years, at length became so formidable to the world, threatening the entire subversion of all social order, that even the Pope, whose devoted subjects they are, and must be by the vow of their society, was compelled to dissolve them."
Pope Clement suppressed the Jesuit order in 1773. They had not been suppressed, however, for 50 years before the waning influence of popery and despotism required their useful labours to resist the light of democratic liberty. And Pope Pius VII, simultaneously with the formation of the Holy Alliance in 1815, revived the order of the Jesuits in all their power. To understand the true nature of the Jesuit order, one must examine what it demands of its members. The Jesuit oath, preserved in historical records, stands as one of the most extraordinary documents of its kind. The following is taken directly from recorded testimony.
I do further promise and declare that I will have no opinion or will of my own, or any mental reservation whatsoever, even as a corpse or cadaver, but will unhesitatingly obey each and every command that I may receive from my superiors in the militia of the Pope. I furthermore promise and declare that I will, when opportunity presents, make and wage relentless war, secretly or openly, against all heretics, Protestants, and liberals, as I am directed to do, to extirpate and exterminate them from the face of the whole earth, and that I will spare neither age, sex, or condition, and that I will hang, burn, waste, boil, flay, strangle, and bury alive these infamous heretics, rip up the stomachs and the wombs of their women, and crush their infants' heads against the walls, in order to annihilate forever their execrable race. That when the same cannot be done openly, I will secretly use the poisoned cup, the strangulating cord, the steel of the poniard, or the leaden bullet, regardless of the honor, rank, dignity, or authority of the person or persons, whatever may be their condition in life, either public or private, as I at any time may be directed so to do by any agent of the Pope or superior of the Brotherhood of the Holy Faith, of the Society of Jesus.
The oath also contained within it what became known as the secret instructions of the Jesuit order, directives written by Loyola himself and preserved for initiates of the higher ranks. Among these instructions was the following.
Finally, let all with such artfulness gain the ascendance over princes, noblemen, and the magistrates of every place, that they may be ready at our beck and call, even to sacrifice their nearest relatives and most intimate friends when we say it is for our interest and our advantage.
The fundamental operating principle embedded within these instructions was simple and unambiguous. The end justifies the means. By this code, lying, theft, perjury, and assassination were not only pardonable, but commendable when they served the interests of the Church. Under various disguises, the Jesuits worked their way into offices of state, climbing up to be the counselors of kings and shaping the policy of nations. They became servants to act as spies upon their masters. They established colleges for the sons of princes and nobles, and schools for the common people, drawing the children of Protestant parents into an observance of popish rites. Napoleon Bonaparte, who had first-hand experience with the reach and methods of the Jesuit order, made the following observation.
The Jesuits are a military organization, not a religious order. Their chief is a general of an army, not the mere father abbot of a monastery, and the aim of this organization is power. Power in its most despotic exercise. Absolute power. Universal power. Power to control the world by the volition of a single man. Jesuitism is the most absolute of despotisms, and at the same time the greatest and most enormous of abuses. The general of the Jesuits insists on being master, sovereign, over the sovereign. Wherever the Jesuits are admitted, they will be masters, cost what it may. Their society is by nature dictatorial, and therefore it is the irreconcilable enemy of all constituted authority. Every act, every crime, however atrocious, is a meritorious work, if committed for the interest of the Society of Jesuits, or by the order of the general.
John Adams, writing to then-President Thomas Jefferson, expressed his own alarm at the nature of the organization.
Shall we not have regular swarms of them here, in as many disguises as only a king of the gypsies can assume, dressed as painters, publishers, writers, and schoolmasters? If ever there was a body of men who merited eternal damnation on earth and in hell, it is this Society of Loyolas.
The famous inventor of the Morse code, Samuel B. Morse, also wrote of the Jesuit design against the United States.
The author undertakes to show that a conspiracy against the liberties of this republic is now in full action, under the direction of the wily Prince Metternich of Austria, who, knowing the impossibility of obliterating this troublesome example of a great and free nation by force of arms, is attempting to accomplish his object through the agency of an army of Jesuits. The array of facts and arguments going to prove the existence of such a conspiracy will astonish any man who opens the book with the same incredulity as we did.
R.W. Thompson, American Secretary of the Navy, writing in 1894, identified precisely who would be the agents used by the monarchs of Europe to destroy the Republic of America.
The sovereigns of the Holy Alliance had massed large armies and soon entered into a pledge to devote them to the suppression of all uprisings of the people in favor of free government. And he, Pope Pius VII, desired to devote the Jesuits, supported by his pontifical power, to the accomplishment of that end. He knew how faithfully they would apply themselves to that work, and hence he counseled them, in his decree of restoration, to strictly observe the useful advices and salutary counsels whereby Loyola had made absolution the cornerstone of the society.
Thompson further described the operational capacity of the Jesuit order in the following terms.
There was no disguise they could not assume, and therefore there was no place into which they could not penetrate. They could enter unheard the closet of the monarch, or the cabinet of the statesman. They could sit unseen in convocation or general assembly, and mingle unsuspected in the deliberations and debates. There was no tongue they could not speak, and no creed they could not profess, and thus there was no people among whom they might not sojourn, and no church whose membership they might not enter, and whose functions they might not discharge.
To understand the Jesuit assault on the United States, one must first understand the political machinery that was assembled in Europe in the aftermath of the Napoleonic Wars. Europe was finally at rest. The Napoleonic Wars had lasted nearly 20 years. The brilliant and crafty Napoleon had spread Europe with the blood of her noblest sons, and at long last, there was peace. In the aftermath, European sovereigns convened the General Council in Vienna, Austria, in 1814. This council has come to be known as the Congress of Vienna, and its proceedings continued for 1 year, ending in 1815. What was decided at Vienna was recorded by Senator Robert L. Owen, who placed the following statement in the Congressional Record of April 25, 1916.
The Holy Alliance, having destroyed popular government in Spain and in Italy, had well laid plans also to destroy popular government in the American colonies, which had revolted from Spain and Portugal in Central and South America under the influence of the successful example of the United States. It was because of this conspiracy against the American republics by the European monarchies that the great English statesman, Canning, called the attention of our government to it.
The high contracting parties of this compact were Russia, Prussia, Germany, Austria, and Pope Pius VII, King of the Papal States, who entered into a secret treaty to destroy popular governments wherever they were found and to re-establish monarchy where it had been set aside. Burke McCarthy, writing in The Suppressed Truth about the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, described the Congress of Vienna as
a black conspiracy against popular governments at which the high contracting parties announced at its close that they had formed a holy alliance. This was a cloak under which they masked to deceive the people. The particular business of the Congress of Verona, it developed, was the ratification of Article 6 of the Congress of Vienna, which was, in short, a promise to prevent or destroy popular governments wherever found and to re-establish monarchy where it had been set aside.
According to McCarthy, the Congress of Vienna formed the Holy Alliance, whose primary goal was the destruction of all popular governments. Popular governments are those where the government allows its subjects to enjoy certain inalienable rights, precisely the kind of government that had been established in the United States. Since 1815, there has been a continual assault on America by the Jesuits to try to destroy the constitutional rights of this great nation. The first of the follow-up congresses was held at Verona in 1822. During this congress, it was decided that America would be the target of Jesuit emissaries, and that America was to be destroyed at all costs. Every principle of the Constitution was to be dissolved, and new Jesuitical principles were to be put into place in order to exalt the papacy to dominion in America. The other meeting was held in Chieri, Italy, in 1825. Here is what was decided there.
In 1825, some 11 years after the revival of the Jesuit Order, a secret meeting of leading Jesuits was held at their college of Chieri near Turin in northern Italy. At that gathering, plans were discussed for the advancement of papal power worldwide, for the destabilizing of governments who stood in the way, and for the crushing of all opposition to Jesuit schemes and ambitions. What we aim at is the empire of the world. We must give them, the great men of earth, to understand that the cause of evil, the bad leaven, will remain as long as Protestantism shall exist, that Protestantism must therefore be utterly abolished. Heretics are the enemies that we are bound to exterminate. Then the Bible, that serpent which with head erect and eyes flashing, threatens us with its venom while it trails along the ground, shall be changed into a rod as soon as we are able to seize it.
The Monroe Doctrine was America's direct response to the Jesuit Congresses of Vienna and Verona. Thomas Jefferson, writing to President Monroe, made the following observations about the gravity of the situation.
The question presented by the letters you have sent to me is the most momentous which has ever been offered to my contemplation since that of independence. That made us a nation. This sets our compass and points the course which we are to steer through the ocean of time opening on us. And never could we embark on it under circumstances more auspicious. Our first and fundamental maxim should be, never to entangle ourselves in the broils of Europe. Our second, never to suffer Europe to intermeddle with cisatlantic affairs.
Jefferson saw this as a great crisis in America's young history, because the wily and sinister Jesuits had been ordered to target America's destruction. The Monroe Doctrine challenged any advance on America by Europe. However, Monroe did not really understand that the crafty Jesuits would not initially use the force of arms to gain their objectives. They would use cunning, craftiness, and utmost secrecy. They would appeal to men's basest points. They would plant their agents in positions of wealth and power, and then use their influence to gain their great prize, the subversion and destruction of every Protestant principle as outlined in the Constitution of the United States. America's two greatest documents, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, were filled with Protestant declarations that were absolutely intolerable to the Jesuits of Rome. The Vatican made its position on these documents unmistakably clear.
The Vatican condemned the Declaration of Independence as wickedness and called the Constitution of the United States a satanic document.
In 1856, a runaway slave named Dred Scott had sought to gain freedom in the free state of Kansas. The case was so important that it went all the way to the Supreme Court. The infamous Dred Scott decision was rendered by the fanatical Roman Catholic Judge Taney, the Chief Justice of the United States at that time. The Taney decision, in a nutshell, was that the black man had no rights that the white man had to respect. Abraham Lincoln, as a child, had watched the selling of young black men and women in a small Illinois town. As he and a friend walked past the slave auction, Lincoln turned to his friend and said, "Someday, I am going to hit it hard." In November of 1855, Charles Chiniquy, a Catholic priest of Kankakee, Illinois, had been attacked in a series of court cases by the Bishop of the Chicago Diocese. Chiniquy had spoken often on the subject of temperance and the evils of liquor. Since many of the priests were alcoholics, and most of the others were social drinkers, Chiniquy's talks on temperance were not appreciated. Chiniquy often quoted the Bible in defense of certain positions he held, which greatly inflamed the Catholic Bishop of Chicago against him. In order to silence him, Chiniquy was framed, being accused by an immoral priest's female relative of misconduct toward her. Charles Chiniquy's case had been so publicized in the Illinois press that very few lawyers wanted to defend him, as they realized that they were not just fighting against a priest in Chicago, they were fighting against the Roman Catholic Church. Charles Chiniquy learned of Abraham Lincoln, a very loyal and upright lawyer in Illinois, so sent Lincoln a wire asking for his services, and within 20 minutes of Chiniquy's wire, he got a reply that said,
"Yes, I will defend your life and your honor at the next May term of the court at Urbana. Signed, A. Lincoln."
When Charles Chiniquy was defended by Abraham Lincoln, we read that Lincoln depicted the career of Father Chiniquy, how he had been unjustly persecuted, and in conclusion said,
"As long as God gives me a heart to feel, a brain to think, or a hand to execute my will, I shall devote it against that power which has attempted to use the machinery of the courts to destroy the rights and character of an American citizen."
As they left the courtroom, Chiniquy was in tears. Lincoln asked him what was wrong, and Chiniquy responded,
"Father Chiniquy, what are you crying for?" "Dear Mr. Lincoln," I answered, "allow me to tell you that the joy I should naturally feel for such a victory is destroyed in my mind by the fear of what it may cost you. There were in the court not less than 10 or 12 Jesuits from Chicago and St. Louis who came to hear my sentence of condemnation to the penitentiary. What troubles my soul just now and draws my tears is that it seems to me that I have read your sentence of death in their fiendish eyes. How many other noble victims have already fallen at their feet?
Lincoln, as far back as 1855 and 1856, was already a marked man that Rome sought to destroy. 4 years later, in 1860, Lincoln was elected President of the United States. As he made his way from Illinois to Washington, D.C., he had to pass through the city of Baltimore. He later said to Chineke,
I am so glad to meet you again. You see that your friends, the Jesuits, have not yet killed me, but they would have surely done it when I passed through their most devoted city, Baltimore, had I not passed by incognito a few hours before they expected me. We have proof that the company which had been selected and organized to murder me was led by a rabid Roman Catholic called Byrne. It was almost entirely composed of Roman Catholics. More than that, there were 2 disguised priests among them to lead and encourage them.
Lincoln further stated to Chineke his understanding of the true nature of the forces arrayed against him.
I saw Mr. Morse, the learned inventor of electric telegraphy. He told me that when he was in Rome not long ago, he found out the proofs of the most formidable conspiracy against this country and all its institutions. It is evident that it is to the intrigues and emissaries of the Pope that we owe in great part the horrible civil war which is threatening to cover the country with blood and ruins.
20 men had been hired in Baltimore to assassinate the president-elect on his way to Washington. The leader of this band was an Italian refugee, a barber well known in Baltimore. Their plan was as follows. When Mr. Lincoln arrived in that city, the assassins were to mix with the crowd and get as near his person as possible and shoot at him with their pistols. If he was in a carriage, hand grenades had been prepared, filled with detonating powder, such as Orsini used in attempting to assassinate Louis Napoleon. These were to be thrown into the carriage, and to make the work of death doubly sure, pistols were to be discharged into the vehicle at the same moment. The assassins had a vessel lying ready to receive them in the harbour, from whence they would be carried to Mobile, in the seceded state of Alabama. While riding on a train, John Wilkes Booth dropped a letter written to him by Charles Selby. Shortly after, the letter was found and delivered to President Lincoln, who after having read it, wrote the word assassination across it and filed it in his office, where it was found after his death and was placed in evidence as a court exhibit. Here is an excerpt from the letter.
Abe must die, and now. You can choose your weapons, the cup, the knife, the bullet. The cup failed us once and might again. You know where to find your friends. Your disguises are so perfect and complete. Strike for your home, strike for your country. Bide your time, but strike sure.
They wanted to stab him. If that failed, they were to shoot him and blow him up. Those failed, so they tried to poison him. The emissaries of the Pope, the Jesuits, had exhausted nearly every method available to them before finally succeeding on the night of April 14th, 1865. On that Friday evening, President Lincoln attended Ford's Theatre in Washington. He was sitting quietly in his box, listening to the drama, when a man entered the door of the lobby leading to the box, closing the door behind him. Drawing near to the president, he drew from his pocket a small pistol and shot him in the back of the head. As the president fell, senseless and mortally wounded, and the shriek of his wife, who was seated at his side, pierced every ear, the assassin leaped from the box, a perpendicular height of 9 feet, and as he rushed across the stage, bareheaded, brandished a dagger, exclaiming, "Sic semper tyrannus," and disappeared behind the side scenes. Chineke, who had spent 20 years of constant and most difficult research into the assassination of Lincoln, came fearlessly before the American people to say and prove that the president, Abraham Lincoln, was assassinated by the priests and the Jesuits of Rome. In the book of the testimonies given in the prosecution of the assassination of Lincoln, published by Ben Pittman, and in the 2 volumes of the trial of John Surratt in 1867, he found the legal and irrefutable proof that the plot of the assassins of Lincoln was matured, if not started, in the house of Mary Surratt, 561 H Street, Washington, D.C. The sworn testimonies show that it was the common rendezvous of the priests of Washington. Chineke declared,
Those priests, who were the personal friends and the father confessors of Booth, John Surratt, Mrs. and Miss Surratt, could not be constantly there without knowing what was going on, particularly when we know that every one of those priests was a rabid rebel in heart. Every one of those priests, knowing that his infallible Pope had called Jeff Davis his dear son and had taken the Southern Confederacy under his protection, was bound to believe that the most holy thing a man could do was to fight for the Southern cause by destroying those who were its enemies.
4 people were tried, convicted, and executed by hanging for the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. Their names were Davy Harold, Lewis Payne, George Atzerodt, and Mary E. Surratt. They were all Roman Catholics. Right after Lincoln's death, John Surratt, who was part of the assassination conspiracy, fled to Montreal. From Montreal, he was taken to Liverpool, England, and then to Rome. When a United States official finally caught up with him, he was found in the Pope's personal army. A conspirator in the assassination of Abraham Lincoln was a member of the Pope's personal army. 3 or 4 hours before Lincoln was murdered in Washington, the 14th of April, 1865, that murder was not only known by someone, but it was circulated and talked of in the streets and in the houses of the priestly and Romish town of St. Joseph, Minnesota. The fact is undeniable, the testimonies are unchallengeable, and there were no railroad nor any telegraph communications nearer than 40 or 80 miles from St. Joseph. The priests of Rome knew and circulated the death of Lincoln 4 hours before its occurrence in their Roman Catholic town of St. Joseph, Minnesota. In the trial of John Surratt, a French minister by the name of Rufus King stated,
I believe that he, John Surratt, is protected by the clergy, and that the murder is the result of a deep-laid plot, not only against the life of President Lincoln, but against the existence of this republic, as we are aware that the priesthood and royalty are, and always have been, opposed to liberty.
Lincoln himself had understood the true nature of the war being waged against him and against the Republic. In his conversations with Chiniquy, he declared,
This war would never have been possible without the sinister influence of the Jesuits. We owe it to popery that we now see our land reddened with the blood of her noblest sons. I pity the priests, the bishops, and the monks of Rome in the United States when the people realize that they are, in great part, responsible for the tears and the bloodshed in this war.
Lincoln further stated,
So many plots have already been made against my life that it is a real miracle that they have all failed when we consider that the great majority of them were in the hands of the skillful Roman Catholic murderers, evidently trained by Jesuits. But can we expect that God will make a perpetual miracle to save my life? I believe not. The Jesuits are so expert in those deeds of blood that Henry IV said it was impossible to escape them, and he became their victim, though he did all that could be done to protect himself.
Lincoln's words prove prophetic. He did not escape them. The Jesuit Order had fulfilled its oath once again, as Chiniquy concluded after his 20 years of research.
Read the history of the assassination of Admiral Coligny, Henry III and Henry IV, and William the Taciturn by the hired assassins of the Jesuits. Compare them with the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, and you will find that one resembles the other like 2 drops of water. You will understand that they all come from the same source, Rome.
The assassination of Abraham Lincoln was not the act of a lone fanatic. It was the culmination of a campaign that had been underway since 1815, planned in the secret councils of Vienna, Verona, and Chieri, and executed by an organization that had spent 3 centuries perfecting the art of political murder. To understand what happened at Ford's Theatre on the night of April 14, 1865, one must understand everything that came before it. The Jesuit Order had declared, at its secret congress at Chieri in 1825, that America was to be destroyed at all costs, and any man who stood in the way of that objective, regardless of his rank, his office, or his popularity among the people, was to be removed. Abraham Lincoln embodied everything the Jesuit Order was sworn to destroy. Lincoln himself understood this with a clarity that few around him shared. He told Chiniquy plainly,
This war would never have been possible without the sinister influence of the Jesuits. We owe it to popery that we now see our land reddened with the blood of her noblest sons.
What is perhaps most remarkable about the Lincoln assassination, and what distinguishes it most clearly as an organized operation rather than the act of a lone individual, is the evidence of foreknowledge. 3 or 4 hours before Lincoln was shot in Washington on the night of April 14, 1865, the news of his murder was already circulating in the streets of St. Joseph, Minnesota, a town with no railroad connection and no telegraph within 40 or 80 miles. The testimonies on this point are, as Chiniquy stated, unchallengeable. The priests of Rome knew and circulated the death of Lincoln 4 hours before it occurred. There is only one explanation for this. The murder had been planned, coordinated, and communicated through the network of the Roman Catholic Church, which stretched from the confessional boxes of Washington, D.C. to the priestly communities of the American Midwest. Abraham Lincoln had told Chiniquy that the Jesuits were so expert in those deeds of blood that Henry IV said it was impossible to escape them. Henry IV had said so and had become their victim. Lincoln said so and became their victim. As Lincoln himself stated to Chiniquy,
This is a mistake. The true motive power is secreted behind the thick walls of the Vatican, the colleges and schools of the Jesuits, the convents of the nuns, and the confessional boxes of Rome.
And the warning that Lincoln understood too late, that Chiniquy spent his life trying to communicate, and that the sources assembled in this account have attempted to document, remains as urgent now as it was on the night of April 14th, 1865.
Oh, that we had the eyes to see that Rome never changes. What she did, she is still doing today.